Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kadene Chambers, and welcome to BTS Live. Today's talk will be a little bit somber, and I'm going to try not to cry. Try really hard. This series now will focus on loss and grief, and it feels like it's been a whole season of losses for so many of us, and I haven't been spared. And so we're kicking off this BTS Live series of loss and grief with my story and the story of my wonderful guest, Dr. Aubrey Franklin, clinical psychologist who is no stranger to us at BTS. And so you will hear my story, you will hear his story, you will hear how we have been navigating the whole experience of losing a loved one. You will hear any gems that we've picked up along the way, strategies that we've used to cope. And you'll hear the different perspective of a recent loss, which would be mine, and his, that would be a little bit longer to give you perspective. And as the months unfold into the season, you'll also hear from some other amazing people who will take us into their personal space and share about their loss and their grieving process. And the idea behind this for all of us is that for those of you who have lost loved ones, it doesn't matter if it is recent or months or years ago, that you will glean some information that can help you navigate the process, because it's a lifetime thing. And there are some of you who are watching because you have a loved one or friend who has experienced the loss and is going through the process, and you want to better understand how to offer meaningful or a more deep support. And we're hoping that you will get that from this series as well. And so I am ready to dive in. Dr. Franklin, how are you?
I am doing so wonderfully well. Thank you so much for having me on and inviting me. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And I know definitively that you're touching a tremendous amount of lives with your show, and everybody who's watching is going to benefit from this, especially this series. So I thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of it.
Thank you so much for being here as usual. So as I said, today's show is gonna be so personal for me. The recent loss that I've had is I lost my mother at the end of April, and to say it was unexpected would be an understatement. She was young and healthy, and I expected to grow old alongside her. And in the blink of an eye, all of that changed. So to give you the quick backstory, about the third week in April, I realized in talking to her that she didn't sound okay. At the time, I was convincing her to go see the doctor. She kept putting it off. I went and I picked her up to take her to the doctor, but we're in the middle of the pandemic still, and I couldn't go into the doctor's office with her, just the waiting room. So I wasn't in there to hear the conversation like normally I would have, because when I picked her up, she looked weak and all of that. She came back and she said, boy, the doctor gave her B12 energy shots. And I was thinking, if you're in pain in your stomach, what does that have to do with the energy? And I was quite annoyed at the diagnosis that she said she got. Dropped her off, said to her, all right, I'll come back. So I was supposed to pick her up from work Wednesday. Pick her up, and she looked so much more sick, but I had already decided to take her straight to the hospital before I picked her up anyway. So I wasn't worried. I was just glad that she had allowed me to pick her up now, And nothing about nothing about the day made me expect that I wouldn't be taking her home from the hospital. You know, I just thought that it was just a bug or something. And again, I couldn't go into beyond the emergency room with her, so I filled out the paperwork for her, and then I had to leave her inside, and I was in the parking lot for hours just waiting. And she had stomach pains, and I was outside getting upset, trying to call her to say they still haven't given you the room yet, or the doctor hasn't come. Anyways, they admitted her the night, and the following day I got to see her, thankfully. Doctors explained that she needed surgery. She'd had fibroids forever. I have had it. I had surgery. She knew this. But she's never wanted to do the surgery. So at this point, one of them had gotten really large and was blocking her colon. And she knew about it from months before because she had started to have complications. So she had been going to see the doctor, but she just chose not to tell me because she didn't want to do the surgery, and it was her choice. And she lived her entire life trying to spare me from stress and worry. So she didn't tell me. And so I'm in the hospital with her. And when the doctor came in and explained that, you know, there's a blockage of the colon, and I just thought, oh, well, it's simple. We do the surgery. And my mother, by this time, who was so weak, she raised her hand and she said, no surgery. And I looked at her like, what do you mean no surgery? She said, no surgery. She was adamant. And I left the hospital after that evening, calling one of my aunts, or when she called to say, just talk to mommy tonight and convince her, because I still thought, you know. But she had been self-medicating for the last little bit. And listen, long story short, her body was so weak, she wouldn't consent. And by the following night, how many o'clock in the morning, I got a call that her system had shut down. And so in less than 7 days, I became aware that she wasn't well, and then she was gone, and it felt surreal. And I'm the only child for my mother, so yeah. It just really didn't feel real. And I'm high functioning, so even when I experience stress, I still know how to go through, keep going, and get the work done. And so I busied myself with plans for her funeral service and all of that. And I was busy for weeks. And it was 4 months later, before I realized that I hadn't started grieving, and I didn't even know. I remember now, I'm trained in psychology, I have a master's, and I'm at this point where I'm thinking, hell, what am I supposed to be doing to grieve? Yeah. I was at a loss. I mean, you study it, you know, but I'm like, so now it is me. And I was stumped because for weeks, I felt like I was in this space of not wanting to do anything. There was no sense to, you know, life. Like, what is this? How could she not be here? What is this? The feeling was just so intense and overwhelming. And it is like absolutely nothing that I had ever experienced in my entire life. Mm-hmm. It knocked me down. We couldn't even start BTS season 2, which should have been for July, because I just had to sit still, like, you know. And so that's the backstory for my loss. And we're going to get into a little bit more about some of the things that I've been experiencing. But I want Dr. Franklin to share about your loss, because we're both talking about our loss. So tell us a little bit about your experience.
Absolutely. First off, thank you so much for telling your story, your testimony, your badge of courage, your celebration of life. You know, this is all in what you're telling. And I know it sounds somber and it brings sadness to our soul. But it's one of those situations, like you said, that you'll never have experienced it in your life, that type of emotion, that type of quality. But it's based and predicated on how much you love the person. So when you love the person very deeply, you're going to hurt very deeply at the advent of their loss. And you know, and as we talk about it, and because I'm, you know, you're 4 months or 5 months into the process. I am, how many years now? I am 13 years into the event, right? And my goodness, it doesn't feel like it was yesterday. It doesn't. It doesn't feel like it was yesterday, because there's been so much growth in those 13 years. My mother passed away in 2008, and my father passed away in 2011. At those times, I was in graduate school, you know, and you know, graduate school to me wasn't that strenuous because I had certain things in place that allowed it not to be. And I was far away. I was in New York City and my parents were in Houston, Texas. So I was as far away as you could possibly be physically. But we had established such a mental and spiritual bond together to where we carried each other in our minds. But in 2008, and my backstory is a little more, I guess, lengthy because in 1996, and this is how I always tell my story, right? I have a way to start it off because I've told it so many times. Back in 1996, my family and I got into a car accident and we hit a tree. My mother was severely injured. She broke 7 ribs. And only women can break 7 ribs, you know, as far as, you know, the amount. And I woke up, we were all in the car and we were all unconscious because we had hit the tree. And my mother, I woke up, I was the first one to wake up, and my mother was in my lap and so much blood, so much glass. And I just started screaming. I was like, "Mama, mama." I was the poster mama's boy for sure. Slept with my mother, you know, until I was that age, 15. I mean, I would have continued, to be very honest with you. I would have definitely continued because that love was just so amazing. So, you know, going into this, seeing this, it was quite a shock. My mother had to be life flighted to the nearest hospital. And for a week, it seemed like she was on the upward mend. Then about a week into our hospital stay, we thought we were ready to go home. Boom, just let's do it. And that's what we were preparing for. And we were visiting our mother in her room. And, you know, the nurses came in and they said, "Okay, we're going to do something," you know. And my mother, she had a punctured lung as well, too. So they were looking at that. When we left, as soon as we could leave the room, all of a sudden we hear "code blue, code blue, code blue." And we're like, that can't be Mama. And then they go past us and they go into Mama's room and we're just like, this is the craziest thing that could ever be. I could never forget my father's reaction. I mean, at this time, my father was probably 60-something years old, tall man, just like myself. But I don't know if you've ever seen a tall Black man jump, like just jump hysterically, like what is going on? And that was the picture in my mind. And to make a long story short, my mother, she had coded and she had died, and they brought her back, but she had lost quite a lot of oxygen to her brain. So she was coherent. And that was kind of the first time I learned that you could be brain dead, but not clinically dead. And I mean, it was just so, and she was on a respirator, 4% respiration. They really thought she would not live the night. But with the 4% went to 8%, the 8% went to 12%. I remember the amount because we were holding on to every percent. And we were praying. They had to put ice underneath her body because it was so hot. The temperature, they were trying to bring the temperature down. She was in ICU, and we basically stayed in the hospital. They allowed us to stay in one of the rooms that was vacant, and we would sleep in the hospital. We wake up and we do that. So also for the next 12 years, my mother stayed alive and she was rehabilitated. We would do exercises. It became our lives. And the mantra was, we got to get mama well. So that was our mantra. Everything else kind of was on pause. And think about your whole life for 12 years really being on pause. Of course, we went to school and all this other stuff, but school was like a fog. The real situation was in that it was in room 2314. I remember the room number. And so we for the next 12 years, my mother, she's not making great progress, but she's making some progress. And, over the course of those 12 years, she just would continually have pneumonia. And that pneumonia is what inherently in 2008, she was suffering from it tremendously, and she succumbed to it. And I was severely distraught. I just, the funeral was, I couldn't stop crying. I was shaking, crying. My father was shaking, crying. But I tell you, the spirit of older people is something that really can help you out. My father, I never forget this. He said, because we all went up to speak during the wake, and things of that nature, where you kind of, I guess in the African-American community, there's a wake like the night before the funeral. Everybody can come and kind of talk, and that social support is there. So we all spoke, and my father spoke at the end, and he said, everybody, I want to tell y'all something. He said, you gotta know how to truly care for somebody. And he pointed down at where, my mother was. And he said, I want to tell you guys, I can tell you, I love this woman. And what he did, and then when my mother, during the funeral, he stood up and he hugged himself. He hugged her because he was hugging her. And he's like, I wanted to hold on to you forever. So that gave me tremendous resilience. But what I later realized over the next 3 years after my mother passed away, that my father, he was giving all the support to everybody else and he didn't keep any for himself. And I remember it was just like you were saying, there was a bodily deterioration that was just so rapid. It was like, my father was a very tall, handsome man, standing very tall, even at an older age. But then I remember coming home and he was bending down tremendously, just like a 90-year-old man. And I was like, Daddy, what's going on? And he would question himself. His confidence was kind of gone to a point where, somebody who's really confident bust through a wall. And now kind of like, what do you think I should do? He never asked that of us. That was not a question Daddy would ask us. But now we see this. And, he passed away. But when I found out that he passed away, surprisingly, I went straight to acceptance, because about 6 months before he passed away, he called me on Sunday. I was in New York City and going to school. And he said, Aubrey, I went to the cardiologist and they told me I need a pacemaker. And I said, okay. And I could see how distraught he was. And I said, okay, well, Daddy, let me ask you one question. Do you want a pacemaker? And he was like, no. And I was like, well, then we won't get one, But I said, we got to do a whole bunch of other stuff to do that. But I said, let's start with our mind. And I was using all the techniques that I was learning. I was there with him for the next I called him 3 times a day. I checked with him in the morning, and I basically therapeutically interviewed him to see where his mind was at. And then in the noontime, I would have to call him again. And then at night, I would call him. And through those 6 months, we became the best of friends. Now, we were always best friends, but I think it was more him being my best friend than me being his. And so we became best friends, and we talk about everything and all this stuff. And he was getting better. But then once again, he called us a week before we believe he passed away. But he called us all. What we later realized that he called us all the siblings individually. And he was just, it wasn't like I'm leaving, but it was just like a normal conversation. And then we didn't hear from him for a week, and he was living by himself. So my sister went over, and that's when she found him. He had passed away in his room. And he was face down, and it seems like they were saying that he had, collapsed. And when my brother called me, my youngest brother called me, he was hysterically crying. But for some reason, I was not crying because I just knew that I knew him, and I had that pleasure to know him. And ever since then, with my father's passing and eventually, my mother's passing, this grief turned into immense strength that, to be very honest with you, I wouldn't live without it. I would, and as we go into our story more, I came up with techniques and strategies that I used throughout the time, and I'm still using them. I'm going to use them for the rest of my life. There's no end process. It's just, it's a continual. So,
and that's what I'm looking forward to, really and truly, as we unfold, because I know that most people must be like me in terms of grappling with what do I do? It took me 4 months to process that I wasn't doing anything that I needed to be doing. I delayed the grief process, and I'm now getting therapy because I realized that I needed it.
Yes,
but that's just one thing. There is still so much more to be done, and so when I listen to you sharing now and seeing how you are 13 years later, it gives me hope.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I know it sounds strange, but you're going to love this you. You're going to love this you. And I want to just hint into one thing that's major importance, because I know we're going to talk about this later. Absorption. Where you can absorb your mother into your being, now you are who you are, and now who God meant you to be, and it's quite amazing. The transformation that you're going to see as you absorb your mother into you, you're going to look back at this, Kadene, and say that I can see the difference between that Kadene and the Kadene in the future. And it's very hopeful. You'll be able to give more people hope, and you're going to come from such a great foundation. I know it sounds strange, and if somebody told me that when I was going through it 4 months or 5 months, I would love to listen to it, but I wouldn't necessarily think it was possible at that time. But I want to tell you definitively, it is possible. It's not only possible, it's the normal route. It's the normal route. It's not the abnormal route. It's the normal route. So, I think that's something very much to look forward to. And keep crying. Let the cries come. The cries are so cathartic. I could tell you this several times where I've just cried where I've heard a remnant of a song, and I just bust out into crying in my car. These cries are necessary. Every single tear must be shed. And go ahead and feel comfortable in letting go, and as you cry as well too. That's really when it can get the best benefit from it. So yeah, I've learned a lot of strategies and continue to.
And I look forward to anything that I'm not yet aware of. The crying, I know that letting the emotions flow through me is important. And so when I got to the 4-month mark where I realized that I had not been allowing myself to, because self-awareness is key for me. Yes. I had been so busy I made myself busy. And when I wasn't busy with the funeral and all of the things that come with handling her estate, because she wasn't planning to go anywhere soon. So lots of things, you know how it is to deal with. And when I wasn't handling legal challenges and this paperwork and find this and trying to piece everything together, I just wanted to sit. I would say to people, listen, I'm just sitting in the stillness of life. I said, listen, I just want to sit. So it was either I was just sitting, and trying to make sense of this deep pain that I was feeling, or I was busy. And I realized when I got to the place of that 4-month mark that I hadn't been really dealing with the loss. I hadn't started grieving. That's when I realized that I was using being busy as a crutch. Yes. I think by that time I had probably cried, 2 good cries, meaning tears will, at night I'm in my bed and the tears will flow, but that's just tears, that's crying, but the quiet type.
Right.
And I had 2, what I'm going to call bawling sessions.
Right.
One of them was a couple of days after her death. And I woke in the morning and I felt like I was just going to go crazy. And I came out of my bedroom, opened the door and went outside, and I just bawled. I just wanted to scream. I still haven't screamed yet. Yeah. I just, you ever watch those movies and see those people doing some emitting some sounds that sounds like it's coming from the depths of their soul. That's what happened that day. Yeah. And I just let it out. And in the middle of it, one of my aunt-in-laws, my uncle's wife, called me because I was helping her with something. She was trying to help me to find something to focus. I was assisting her with something with her business, and she called me. And when she heard me, she goes, "Lord, have mercy. What is wrong with you now?" So I said, I'm just, because all this time I've been being strong.
Right.
The funeral day, I didn't cry. I was just focused on making sure that the funeral and everything about it reflected who she was. And my mother was cheerful. I haven't even shared that. She was full of life. Everybody loved her. Yes. Marcia she lit up any room that she entered. She was so irreverent, Christian background that's what she was born into, church going. But she had an energy and a spirit about her that was so whole.
Yes.
So there were so many facets to her, and people just gravitated towards her like moths to a flame. Like she had something that I don't have. Thankfully, my daughter has some of that. So they were more the people persons in the family. Yeah. And I'm the one that's a little bit more reserved, more private,
Even though you're doing a show right now. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
You see, this is something that yes, it's funny. This is what this is my passion project. Yeah. It is something that I feel called to do. Because other than that, I'm perfectly comfortable with being behind the scene. That's where I'm most comfortable. Right. But yes, my mother owned any space. And listen, I knew she helped people, and I knew that she was loved and had many friends. But listen, after she died, people came out of the woodworks from all over the world, messaging and calling, telling me about the wonderful things that she had done and been doing for them. And I was floored because I didn't realize the extent of how good she had been to so many people. Yeah. And I felt so proud and honored to be her daughter. Yeah. I was proud of her legacy. And so even with the dealing with the loss, one of the things I used to cope, and my daughter and I would talk about it, was the fact that she has left such a legacy that when thinking about it, the only thing you can do is smile, laugh, and marvel. There was nothing about her that was sad. She's that person that everybody would call when they felt like they were going through stuff and they wanted to be cheered up. Everybody loved her. And so that is what I actually used to help me, because we know that I'd be at home crying, my daughter is there, and we'd remind ourselves, boy, mommy would say, okay, you've been doing this for 1 week now. When are you going to stop?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, and you know what? That's what you're going to self-actualize. That's what you're going to get to is, my goodness, I came from them. And I wanted to add one other thing that you were saying. You said you can't help but just, be proud and happy and marvel.
Mm-hmm.
And a fourth thing I wanted to add is you can't help but now manifest it in you.
Mm.
You are, sometimes it's pretty cool to know science a little bit, because we as human beings, we want 1 + 1 = 2, we want patterns and all that stuff. When you realize, and I know we talked about this in several classes, all this other stuff, especially evolutionary, what they call genetic relatedness, meaning you share 50% of your mother's genes. 50% of you is your mother. Now, know that because 50% of you is your mother lives on in you forever. Forever. For as long as you're alive, as long as you're in your daughter and your daughter's children and your daughter's children's children's children. This woman is going to flow through you in y'all's lives. And it's just an amazing thing to realize that we didn't lose them. We absorbed them.
That's so comforting. That's such a comforting thought, because, so like I sound like her. I can't hear it when I speak.
Yes.
But people will say to me, I've had friends after she passed who I called and we were talking, and one gentleman answered the phone. Yeah, one gentleman answered the phone one day and he went, Jesus Christ, you sound like your mother.
Yes.
And he was distraught. I said to him, I'm sorry. I think I'll just text you from now, because,
You'll start talking like her. You're going to start catching yourself saying things that she said. You're going to start acting a certain way and you're like catching yourself. Wait a second. That's just like her. You're going to start seeing pictures of her.
I'm seeing that already in terms of the acting. So in other words, they're to the point where I'm wondering, did I always use?
Yes, right. Did I always do that?
Because I've been asking myself that question. Was I always behaving in ways that was similar to her? Or is it just stuff that I'm doing suddenly? Is it that I had missed that I was doing it? Or is it all new? Because
I believe it's all new.
I hear her coming out of my mouth more and more often these days, And my grandmother is still alive. That's my mother's mother, and she's with me now. Yeah. And it was just a couple of days ago that we were talking, and she said to me, we're talking about mom. And sometimes that's hard. I have to say to people, I can't do this, because that's something that we want to talk about as well. And some people want to do a lot of talking about the loss. Some people don't. Some people have a mix. For me, I enjoy talking about mom, but on my terms. I don't want to talk about the hospital and how she's going. I want to talk about, my preference is to talk about her full of life and her energy and her love and her laughter and her irreverence.
Yes.
That makes me feel good. Anything else brings my energy down. And so we were talking and grandma said, sometimes I'm sitting and I hear you up there, so I'm working from home, and she goes, oh my God, hear me, daughter.
Yeah.
And she hadn't said this to me before. And she says to me, it is so comforting to me. So my grandmother is being comforted by things that she sees and hears in me that reminds her of my mother. Because though I am grieving, and it's so hard for me, and my daughter is grieving because we were a threesome, my mom, my daughter, and I.
Oh, yeah.
My grandmother is also going through it because she's 93, hearty, healthy, whole. And she's dealing with the loss of her child. There is never an age where it doesn't pain you like crazy
Yes.
to lose a child. And so we've been bonding and dealing with that. And so when she said to me, she was hesitant in saying it to me because she wasn't sure how I would have received it.
Right.
Because sometimes she's talking and she's going on about how she has died or something. And I had to excuse myself because it was too much. And so she was hesitant. And I said to her, no, okay, I'm happy. I'm good with that. I'm happy. The truth is, whenever somebody says to me, you sound so much like your mother, I literally light up and say, thank you.
Oh, yes.
It makes me feel so good.
Oh,
because it's like it's confirming that she isn't entirely gone.
Yeah, yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I look at pictures around my house of me, and you know, like you said, this is the beauty part of it. And I'm so glad that it's starting already for you. Positive things about your mother are coming out of the woodworks. And my father was a teacher. Both my parents were teachers. And students that my father taught probably 50 years ago coming out of the woodwork still. So every now and then, you know, you get like somebody contacts my sister and it's just like, you know, your father taught me back in 1969 and Mr. Franklin, I remember him forever. And several pictures are coming out. I did not know this, but when my father passed away, my aunt showed us a picture of him when he was 17 years old. He looked exactly like all the children were like, that's you, Aubrey. We were floored. We were like, that's you. We didn't know that because we never saw pictures like this, you know? And I'm wondering, like you're saying, like you're wondering, did we always act like this or is it new? And it has to be new because everybody else is confirming that it's new. They're saying, hey, we didn't see this before, but we see this now. And it's such a beautiful thing when people tell you that you look, act, sound, anything like your parent. And because you are. Do you have any siblings?
I'm an only child from my mother.
Okay. Now, because I wanted to, my siblings, we were a tight knit. We were like the Franklin Five, like the Jackson Five, you know. And we all knew how to play a musical instrument. We just weren't like, you know, they were older versions and me and my brother were younger. But my siblings really, we all helped each other out with the grieving process. You know, some of my siblings, they felt very guilty. They felt like, you know, it was their fault. Another sibling was more kind of like, you know, angry, you know, like only thinking about the bad things, you know, and then, you know, my younger brother, he really like, we had to check him in, like, as far as like his mental state was just dragged. Yeah.
And I'm happy that you're bringing that up because some of that I want to talk a little bit about, guilt, feelings of guilt.
Yes.
So let's spend a minute or so talking about that, because I explained that I didn't realize that my mom was sick because she wasn't at home and she didn't want me to know. She was very deliberate about that. It wasn't a mistake. And there's a part of me that felt like, why didn't you realize?
Yeah.
And so there's a small amount, and I say a small amount because I've done the work where I have tried to come to terms with the fact that this was her choice. And that had I known she was sick from a month or two before, meaning when she had gotten sick and it was getting worse, I would have insisted that she did the surgery.
Yeah.
It means that she would have been pushing back because my mother was so stubborn. It means that I processed that it could have meant that she and I would have been butting heads for weeks over this thing.
Right.
You know, or it could also mean that she would have caved in and did the surgery. And if she had ever done that surgery, because I pressured her and she died on that table, I don't know how I would have lived with myself.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've reminded myself of that so that I can give myself a little more grace.
Yes.
I can give myself a little more grace. And so I don't sit in that space of guilt
Right.
And I know that that is a natural feeling for some people to
Right.
experience. And so I'm happy that you pointed out that there were 5 of you as siblings, and each of you experienced something a little different as it relates to one of the major impacts of the loss of primarily, I guess, your dad. Because
that was it. Yeah.
I can't imagine finding him and dealing with the fact that he's been gone for days.
Yeah.
And nobody realized.
Nobody realized it.
Yeah.
I have a oldest brother, second oldest brother, sister, middle sister, and then there's me. I'm the fourth, and then my younger brother is the fifth. And my sister found my father, but my second oldest brother and my youngest brother, which have similar personalities, and that's something too that we go into when we're talking about grief. Grief is effectuated differently based on our different personalities. So they went straight to grief. I mean, what was so amazing is that I was on the phone with my younger brother, and my sister was on the phone with my second oldest brother, but we were in the same house, so we heard each other's conversations. They were talking about the same exact guilt. They said it the exact same way. And me and my sister, which are both clinical psychologists, we looked at each other and we were like, wow, yeah, they're really experiencing it. And I must say, I think, like you said, first you got to give yourself grace. And that's what they didn't necessarily give each other grace immediately. They gave each other but I think it had more to do with the fact that there's always a child in the family that acts like they're in charge of the parent and not the other way around. I must say I was never that person. I was like, hey, look, you're the boss. I'm the child. That's how it'll always be. But my second oldest brother and my youngest brother, they felt that they could talk back to me. They felt like I could carry on an intellectual conversation with this 68-year-old man, and I'm only 12. And I would look at them and I'd be like, are you crazy? But they were like, yes, I know some things, and that's how it extended throughout their lives. And they felt guilty because they were actually very close to my father, day by day. And they felt guilty because they didn't treat him as well as they thought they would. They were kind of ordering Daddy around in his old age, Daddy, do this, do that. And they I would say they kind of took advantage of.
So question. So because of my studies and all of that, I understand what it means to give myself grace.
Right.
And I described what that looked like and why. But in a couple words, can you say to our audience what that can look like for them, because just to help them to understand how they can actually start giving themselves grace?
Wonderful question. And the way I could sum it up is from a positive psychological standpoint, which is emotions, positive versus negative emotions. And we first have to give yourself grace is to first identify the negative emotions that are occurring in your frequently. Then start to attach more positive emotions in your day-to-day thought process than your negative emotions. And now grace is going to take some time to bubble up. It's going to take some time to, manifest in your life.
So hold on. So this means something that we talked about in one of our stress management shows for BTS when you were on, thought stopping. So we're going to have to implement thought stopping. So when we realize that we're going down that road of saying, it's my fault, I could have saved him, I could have saved her, I should have seen that, I shouldn't have missed it. How could I? When you realize that you're having those thoughts, you stop them, and you replace that thought with something that is more positive, where you go, so for me, for example, it was, this was her choice.
Yes, right.
This was her choice, because, and while for some people that may not sound like it's positive, for me it was, because it meant that life and death didn't happen to her. She decided how she was going to go.
Yes, she did. She had it and she was in full control. Yeah, absolutely. No, that is a very, very great positive Because it has to do with internal locus of control, believing that the control lies with you as opposed to your outside circumstances. And that not only helps, that epiphany not only helps your grieving process, but once again, it's one of those things that you have incorporated now into your system of life. So now you can do it anytime you want to. Is to help in any experience of your life, right? It's like now, and this is an awesome thing too, just to entice you on the future of this, is that now you can do anything. You have the power that you never had in your entire life, and any circumstance that comes your way now, make sure that you declare in your mind that yes, I can do that, because of what you've gone through. And then this also helps you to realize that your loved one didn't, their life wasn't in vain, right? They're like, celebrate their life and in your life and in your children's life and in everything that you do. Me and my siblings, we started a foundation in their name. You know what I mean? Yeah, and it's just it's something that's there.
Let me interjecting, because that is, I'm happy that you've touched that, because realizing the extent to which my mother was helping. So she wasn't wealthy. But in the last few years before her death, she had been doing so much better financially. But when I tell you that she didn't keep all of her financial success for herself, she wasn't focused on getting as wealthy as possible, because I think she'd have been rich if she was keeping her money. All she kept doing was finding people to help. She just wanted to hear, because listen, people don't talk. There are certain things that we don't talk about, So I now have her phone, and I had to be going through the phone for this and that and the other, finding contacts and so on and so forth, which was that in and of itself. But listen, that was funny too, because while it was, it was painful, some of the things that you had to go through, it floored me. It took me months before I could deal with her clothes in her closet and things like that. Her phone has always been a source of joy, because my mother was never very keen on spelling. She can spell, but she was so lazy, it's not funny. She would just write the words any way she felt like writing it. And people had the weirdest names in her phone. So she met somebody at the supermarket and they made a connection, because as I said, people were just drawn to her. She would have the person in her phone as supermarket friend. She had people in her phone called girl. Just girl. Just girl. She had somebody in there called friend, like friend. And listen, it was always such a delight. Even after now, I'd be going through the phone and I'd say to my daughter, Kalisa, come look at this. I am trying to figure out who is this person. But that's how she was. And I used to tease her and say, Mommy, why you spell this person's name like that? She would say, you're lucky. You have time. I'm typing and a typo went in there. I'm not erasing it to start over. So it just stay like that, And those things gave me such joy. And so as I was saying, when I was going through her phone, I found so many persons in there who she was sending money to. She was helping this person to go to school. She was helping that person who had a baby to buy diaper or baby feed or clothes. And every couple of months, she would ship food and toys and clothes to Jamaica, back to Jamaica. And so some of it from her pocket, and then the rest of it, she would speak to her friends. And as I said, she had a lot of them to tell them, she's sending stuff out. And so people would donate stuff that they have, that they're not wearing anymore, or that their kids have outgrown. And, or they would go and they would buy stuff. And so every couple of months, she would send a big box of stuff to Jamaica for people who were in need. And so you're talking about doing a foundation, for building a foundation for your parents with your siblings. And I decided that I'm keeping my mother's legacy alive, because that's the example that she has now set for me. At the time, I wasn't thinking about it like that, meaning while she was alive. I used to be so frustrated when, she's sending stuff down and she's planning to do this in 2 months, but the house would be so packed up with stuff.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, Mom, I can't even get to this thing or that thing. How do you? And she would go, you're lucky, saying, you complain so much. That's the kind of conversation that we'd have. And afterwards, all I'm thinking is, okay, how do I now keep the goodness that she had exhibited and that good impact, that solid positive impact that she had on the world going. And that's what I've decided to do. I'm going to continue doing that. And her birthday was September 15. And I made sure that even with everything that was going on, and at the time I was still at a place where I felt like just sitting still, I made sure I packaged some stuff, got some stuff from some of her friends and shipped them off to Jamaica. And so I was so happy about that. And I was so happy about that because it made me feel like I am continuing her work and making sure that the world does not forget her. Her goodness.
And they won't, as long as you're on the job, as long as we are on the job. That is our task. That is what has been entrusted to us. And we take the reins. I had so much great social support. I had still have it. Now my wife is my best friend, but before I was married, I had a best friend, and he was there when I heard about my mother's passing. He was there when I heard about my father's passing. We lived together. He was my roommate. He really helped. His name, I just want to shout his name, Peter Hartel. He really helped me out. I remember when, because it was kind of touch and go with my mother, throughout the night. And then my sister called like 5 o'clock in the morning, and she was like, yeah, she's gone on. And I had that feeling, and I remember waking up and I went to his room and I started crying. I said, she's gone, man, and I don't know what to do, and he went to work. He said, just chill out. He got his junk food. He got some junk food. We watched funny movies together. He helped me to, when I wanted to talk about it, and then he did the same thing with my father. We had moved. We weren't roommates then, but he came to me, and he did the same exact thing. So it's you, that best friend is. So also
this now, you said this is another strategy that is important for coping with loss and grief.
Oh yes, this is a community situation that must be. It cannot be done. I don't know how I could have done it by myself. In fact, it's not necessary. Well, for me, I was blessed to have these people in my life already. And now there's some individuals who may not have these amounts of people at the ready for them. I wouldn't say go looking for them, but I would say use what you have. And because you've already established that with a particular person, but a best friend, social support of any variety, a therapist could also provide that type of social support as well too, But it's just those things are necessary. Those are you can't do it without it.
Yeah. I'm happy you've pointed that we've delved into that a bit. One of our participants who is on now and listening, Chantel. Mm-hmm. Chantel just sent us a message, and I'm going to break. I know we said that we would have taken the questions after we've wrapped, but I want to just quickly say, she said her loss was in April of this year, and she think that she grieved, but she's not sure, and it feels like she's having a relapse, like she's back at the denial stage. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Franklin, but I want to point out that the grieving process is not linear. Right. My dear, it's a cycle. You go through the different stage, sometimes multiple times. And so I'll allow Dr. Franklin to address that though. She said she feels that she's back at the denial stage.
Mm-hmm. Well, what just came to my mind, and I know I don't think I've ever heard it be explained like this, but grief is like how the earth rotates around the sun. The earth, now, if you're looking at the earth, by itself, it's going in a cycle. It's going round and round and round. but it's making progress as it goes round and round and round, and it goes around the sun.
Oh.
You see what I mean?
So
that
it's right. So it spins on its own axis, but even while it's doing that, it's also moving.
It's moving, yes. Right. So that's why we have seasons. That's why we have time. That's why we have all this. That's all time is. Time is not a watch. Time is how far how it goes around the sun.
So how do we equate that to the grieving process, though?
Right. So here's the thing: that cycle that she may be experiencing, realize that you'll continue with that cycle. That's going to be a normal thing. And don't necessarily look at it as a relapse, just like we don't look at the next day as a relapse, right? Oh no, here comes the next day. Oh no, we're like yes to a brand new day, right? Even though it's the sun still came up the same way and it's still gonna go down the same way, right? So we have to look at this instead of a relapse. It's not a relapse. It's just a revolution. Ooh,
okay.
It's a revolution. It's a revolution. And every now and then you're going to have to revolt. Now, we also have the process of grief that is forward moving, but it's going around a core. And let's liken the sun to the person you lost, a person, place, or thing that you lost. Now, it's going to revolve around that. But here's the cool thing about why the earth goes around the sun. It gets energy from the sun.
Wow.
It doesn't deplete.
So we're equating now that the person, place, or thing, that because it's important to know that loss and the grieving process is not just about losing a loved one. Your ill health, losing a career, losing a relationship, so a marriage, a divorce, a breakup, anything like that. It's a loss, and we go through the grieving process if it is something or somebody who we really loved once the emotions are deep. So that person or thing is represented by the sun. Yes. And you're saying we might be going around in the grief process, but we're also drawing energy or getting energy.
Yes, we're getting stronger. We're getting stronger. Yes. It's providing.
Sorry, there. As you say, getting stronger. It reminded me of something that I came across probably weeks after my mom died, where I came across something that said it was an image that showed like a ball in the middle of a jar, and said it was labeled grief. And in the beginning, the early stages, the ball was huge and took up the whole space in the jar. And then there was a second image where the ball appeared a little smaller, and then the next one where it appeared a little smaller. But what was being said, what was said, the caption was that grief isn't, it is not that it is getting smaller, because the loss that we feel for the person, place, or thing that really upended our world, or feels like it upended our world, that loss never goes away. Whenever I think about my mother, I don't know that I'll ever not feel that loss. Like,
right.
You understand me? Right. But so that is the same. What they've said is that we are expanding around the grief.
Yes.
And so over time, we are at a place where we have become more full. And I like the examples that you're giving, because it's saying that I'm getting more and more energy. And as I absorb more of my mother's essence and who she was, how she lived her life, and I'm becoming fuller and fuller, then that is what is going to get me to a place where the feeling of grief isn't overwhelming. As I continue to live my life has now expanded and become bigger around the grief. And I liked that image. And I like the example that you're sharing with us. And so it gives us a different perspective to look at loss and grief from. And I appreciate that. So I'm hoping.
In essence, it takes a new definition of loss and grief has to be taken into your mind. We can no longer look at it as grief sucking us dry. More or less, grief is energizing us, right, on a day-to-day basis. The sun, look, well, you can go to the beach and you can get sunburned, but you can also go to the beach and you get vitamin D. The rays of the sun allow us to be, and what do we do with the sun's rays? We absorb them. We
Yeah.
absorb them. We don't allow them to do anything bad to us. Everything here has to be looked at as how there must be a benefit to it. So just because I don't see it yet doesn't mean it's not so. It just means that I continually search for the benefit. And I will continue, if I continually search, I will continually find.
Right. So if we are at this place where months later or years later, if we get to years, then that's, it means that we are doing some of the things to move the grieving process along. Because once we're going through and having healthy coping strategies and techniques, then it means that we will not feel like it's sucking us dry. So if we're still feeling like it's sucking us dry months later, and God forbid years later, then it means that we need healthier coping strategies, healthier coping skills, right?
Absolutely.
Right. And so that's just the reminder in general. So anybody who might be watching us, anyone, and who might be feeling like, but I feel like I am dying still, it means that we should be looking at the strategies and techniques that you're using. And I'm hoping that some of the ones that Dr. Franklin is sharing with us today is sending off a light bulb in your mind that you're going, okay, all right, that sounds like I could use that. And as we talk about strategy, Dr. Franklin, let's jump into that, because what else can you share with us that can help us practice healthier or healthy strategies and techniques as we grieve?
Right. Well, first, I think the first idea our premise is to realize that it's best not to put a time limit on the grief. Take the time restrictions off, because we don't know how long it's going to be. And I think that allows us to focus more on our own self and how we're changing for the better and evolving for the better. But if we focus on the time, I think we take away the proper evaluation of our lives, because if we're just focused on the time can look any way we want it to look. It's really based on our perspective. So I think when you focus more on the other things, you can oust those negative thoughts patterns, that enter into your life, like guilt, shame, doubt, shock, and because we need a lot of positive emotions in order to really figure that out. So I think that's one step, is to change the narrative. A second thing I think would be to absorb the person as much as you possibly can. So when you absorb the person, you're looking at pictures at your own pace. If you have video, if you have audio, try to listen to some of that audio. You know what your limits are at that particular point in time, but I think it's necessary to properly absorb the person that way. And especially the more you love the person, I'm thinking like a sixth cousin, you're not going to do as much absorption because, and here's another side to it, because y'all don't share that much genetic material. The more genetic material you share, highest is 100% with identical twins, but 50% with parents and siblings. That's going to be where your more energy is going to lie. So just realize, once again, the more love that you've given this person, that's how long it's going to also take to continue to absorb this person. So the second thing I think would be to absorb, our absorption. And then the third thing, if we were to sum it up in 3 levels, I would say that the third thing is to live, because knowing the first 2, knowing that you're not living separate from this person anymore. Now this person goes with you everywhere. You know, there were a few things when my parents were alive that I did not want them to know. And now I have no choice. They see all, they know, because they're my eyes, they're my voice, they're my ears, they're my hands, you know, and so therefore now I live with them in mind and I live with them in body. So I think it's a really beautiful thing when you start to truly live. That is the third step. Live now with bang busters. I mean, don't do crazy stuff, of course, but I mean, live with such an amazing level of confidence like you've never experienced before, to where things that normally were hard to do, they're easy now.
You know, I love it. I love it. And as you're saying that, I was in my head and I'm thinking, are you living?
Yeah.
Are you living? Because I want to do that. Because at first, when mom just passed, I wasn't sure I wanted to continue.
Mm-hmm.
Disclaimer, I wasn't suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
I just felt like, what is the purpose and sense of this?
Yeah.
This incredible pain is too much. How can she be God? Why is she not here? This doesn't make any sense. And this didn't feel worthwhile.
Yes.
You know, I tend to describe life sometimes like it's a video game.
Mm-hmm.
And I was feeling like, yes, this game is no longer nice.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to play this game anymore. I don't know if I want to keep playing this game. That's how I felt. And so, but today, now we're at 5 going on 6 months later. A quick point. I do a gratitude journal every day. I kept that up. And because it's important, it's one of those self-care practices for me, because it helps me to make sure I'm centered in gratitude at all times. And I know you get that, because you and I are on wavelength about that. So I kept it up. But can I tell you something? For weeks and months after, I couldn't say I'm grateful to be alive.
Yeah.
The thought would come in my mind and I stopped it because I was doubtful that I was grateful. I wasn't sure that I was grateful. And I felt like I needed to be true in my gratitude journal. And I was a little bit stressed about it because it felt like I was being disrespectful to the divine, my divine energy that I have and spirit and life. And I was thinking that I'm not grateful for it. So there's that conflict from my Christian background that I had. But it was a struggle because I'm saying, I'm really not sure that I am. Truth is, we're at now approaching month 6, I think. And I can now say it without feeling like I'm telling a lie or feeling like it's a struggle to say it.
Yes.
For the first few weeks, few months, there was no, like, it felt like all the joy in the entire world. My world was just sucked into a black hole and had disappeared. There was no joy. I want to make sure we address that, to share that, because if you're experiencing that, it's normal. It's okay. I felt like I would never, ever, ever again experience joy. That's how I felt. I have my bird feeder that always excites me since we put it up last year at the start of the pandemic, and it has always brought me such pleasure and peace and calm. And I sat in the living room or on the patio, and I'm looking at the birds out there, and I'm still feeding, but I derived no pleasure from it. And it was such a scary place to be at, but it's normal. It's normal. And so I'm at this place now where, again, I am enjoying my birds and I'm enjoying the trees and the grass, and I go outside, and so I am grateful, because at that point that I was going through it, I know it was a phase and I know that I expect to come through it,
Right.
But the time it takes, it can feel so, it's like, I just want this to end right now. But emotions don't work like that.
Right.
Unfortunately, you can't just tell yourself that I'm tired of this and I want this to be done now. And it's done immediately. Well, not usually, if you're somebody who is super zen and at that level, then maybe you can. But for the regular folk like me, it takes time, but there is hope. You get back to a place where you start finding joy in the little things, and that grows and grows and grows. And so I am encouraging anyone who has experienced loss, whether it's a loved one, whether it's through death, or a relationship that has ended, because some of those can be so devastating. Whether it's your career that you've lost, or your material possessions in a natural disaster or a fire or something like that. Because yes, we go through the grieving process the same way. I'm saying we get to a point where we start feeling like our old self again, where we can appreciate the small things in life, and that builds incrementally till we get to the place where we can enjoy the big things again. And it no longer feels like our life is defined by the loss. Because at first, it feels like everything about you is defined by the loss.
Absolutely. It needs to be. This is part of the transition process. And I wanted to encapsulate everything that you beautifully said with this term I call new joy. New joy. Check this out. And as you were talking, I was hearing every word you were saying, and I was like, wow, this is a new strategy that's unfolding here. Is the fact that, how could you experience the same joy anymore? Your loved one is no longer there to deal with that joy. So now you need new joy, right? So like you're saying, those things that you said normally would give you joy don't give you joy anymore. That is a litmus test to let you know you are moving forward. I forget what I think it's Nietzsche that says that if the only way to put new stuff in a cup is to empty out the original contents, right? And we sometimes think, like you were saying earlier too, that as we're going through it, that we're going to stay the same. No, as we go through it, we must change. We are changing, and it's for the better. It's new joy, it's new love, it's new everything, and it's totally predicated on the person that you, and I don't even want to say lost anymore, because as we've been describing it, how can we continue to say that we lost somebody?
It's a transition.
We gained her. You gained. And you know what I used to say, and what just reminds me of what I used to say, when I would talk about my parents passing away, I didn't say pass away. I said, oh yeah, my parents passed into me. I think I said that in one of your classes one
passed
time.
Into me. I need to.
Yeah, they passed into me, right? Like they didn't pass away. They're not gone. They're right here. They're your spleen. They're your organs. They're your kidneys. They're your eyes. They're your hair. They're every part of you. and so how can you lose with somebody that close to you?
That's powerful. I am, while the topic today is a somber one, I am so grateful that we can have this kind of conversation in such a way where I can be smiling at intervals.
Oh yes.
I'm grateful for that. Because most of the time when we think about loss and grief and grieving, it is so heavy, it is so sad, it is so, and I want us to all remember or know, if we weren't aware, that it doesn't all have to be heavy and sad all the time. No.
Right.
And so I'm grateful that we were able to do that today with our talk. And so we've covered quite a few things for episode 1 of loss and grief. And we have a little bit more to get into for the upcoming weeks in November, as we look at little bites, little gems, and we continue to share our processes and our journey and our story for the month of November. And then we'll move into December and January. That we're able to have this conversation at this point, to be able to help so many people is what really makes me happy. And as we continue in the following months, and so, Dr. Franklin, I know you're coming back,
Oh, yes.
I know you're coming back as we talk.
I already brought my sleeping bag.
Yeah, good. And so with that, we're almost at the wrap, but I want to ask any of our participants So do you have, are there any questions that you want to ask me or Dr. Franklin? I really want to thank you for being on with us today. Any questions for us?
Hi, hello.
Oh,
Yes,
hi,
hello.
Alicia. Dr.
How are
Franklin,
you?
Alicia is my lifelong friend, and she recently lost her daughter, her 10-year-old daughter. So Alicia is one of the persons that we will be speaking to shortly. But Alicia, you have the floor. Ask your question.
Hi, Dr. Franklin. I just want to ask, when you're going through a series of loss,
Yes.
how is it? Because I have been dealing with a whole lot of loss. I've lost so many things in such a short span of time. And it is, for me, it has been hard.
Yes.
I'm trying to process all of what is happening, and I'm not sure if I'm grieving. Based on what I've been hearing from you and Kadene, I'm not sure if I'm dealing with the grief. I think I'm still stuck in a place where I am just coping. Mm-hmm. And that's what has been taking me throughout this time, just my coping mechanism by being there for others, not really being there for myself. How do I slow down and be there for myself? How do I go about releasing the pressures of who I have to keep this thing up for? Because I have children, I have friends, and everyone seems to be relying on my strength. Mm-hmm. And I think I've been doing a good job of dealing with everything, but I don't think I've grieved. I have been coping. How do I move from this stage that I feel as if I'm stuck in?
Well, you already starting to, because you're acknowledging the fact that you are in that situation, that challenge where you feel that you're stuck. So I think that is step one that you already achieved. So you're already in the process. The second thing I think you would start to focus on is, and you mentioned a pretty big theme, which is where you feel like everybody's relying on you and you have no one to rely on. Is there any particular person, maybe it's a friend or somebody who may not be fully involved in the losses, that you feel that you could talk to and have you time where you can let everything out?
Yes, I've been talking to persons. Kadene, for one, we had a really lovely conversation yesterday. But for the most part, I'm so mindful of others, mindful that persons have their own life to live, have their own burden. And I think that is what have been preventing me from really just bearing it all out, if I can see that.
Right, I see, and I think something that I wanted to actually discuss earlier is that, once again, the grieving process, it's not a one size fits all, or even there's many ranges of time frames and also stages in which people go through. Sometimes that stage is the stuck stage where you're there for a little bit. But I feel that since you're already on the transition, where you created step one, where you realize that you are stuck and you don't want to be stuck anymore, and then this second stage where you're reaching out to Kadene and you're doing this, start to allow that to continue, and as you focus less on the fact of have I gotten to the grieving stage, and more on the fact of just I'm in step two, so let me stay in step two, which is I'm reaching out to other individuals, friends that I could talk to, and they can just listen to me as opposed to me having to listen to everybody else. And as you increase that time with Kadene and you start to balance that time with the same amount of time that you have with your other family members who rely on you, you'll start to see the change in yourself. And you'll cease to think that you haven't reached the grieving process and start to see this as you now. This is how you're coping. This is how you're dealing with it.
And Alicia, I want to remind you that you are so selfless. And that's why you feel as if you've been giving everything to everyone. And you have. I know this personally. And that's why you feel so almost guilty reaching out and asking for support. But I'm going to remind you publicly what I said to you privately yesterday. Girl, call me. And this is a perfect opportunity for us to remind everybody who is on with us today, because Alicia isn't the only person who has experienced a loss and is dealing with it right now. Others on, as we saw the question from Chantel, Monique has also had a loss. And in other words, and then our viewers, to say to them, be comfortable asking for help, especially when we are typically the strong ones who are helping everybody else. Be comfortable saying what you need. And for those of us who may not have, who don't feel like we have access to that support system from a friend or family who isn't also going through the grief, if that's an issue, then we may need to look at therapy. And if money is an issue for anyone, I'm going to remind you that in the US, in Canada, in the UK, in Jamaica, and whichever other Caribbean country, there are free resources for therapy. So just do a little research, go ask the right question. If you don't know, reach out to us at Via Productions. We're on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Send me a message. I will do the research for you if you can't find it, because one of my aim in life is to do everything that I can to make sure that you are healthy and whole, and so whatever I can do to help. Ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon was really good. It was a good chat. It was a deep chat. It was about something that's somber, but it was done in such a way that didn't deplete our energy. It didn't deplete mine, and I'm hoping that it had a similar impact for you. I hope that anyone who is on or who's watching us, who is going through a loss, feels the community and recognizes that you're not alone. The feelings that you are experiencing, others have experienced similar things, and there is hope, and that there are techniques that we can use that can help us better deal with the process of grieving, whether it is the death of a loved one, the loss of a relation, the end of a relationship, loss of your career or material things. It's important for me to reiterate that, because loss doesn't only come in one form. So I want to make sure that we acknowledge you, our viewers, who are watching and thinking, the things you're describing, I'm feeling them, but nobody for me has died. I've lost my career, or my marriage of how many years have ended, or my relationship of how many years has ended. And I'm feeling like all that, so it doesn't apply to me. Yes, it applies to you. Yes, it applies to you. And so we want to make sure that you feel seen and you feel understood. And said gone 3 times, but I'm seeing a question here from Danisha. I'm so happy, Danisha, that I kept talking, because I'm happy for your question. Danisha's question is, how do you suggest dealing with the loss when it is the first thing that you think of in the morning and it lingers at nights, or simple activities trigger a memory? I came on late, but not sure if you touched that topic already. I'm going to start, and then I'll hand over to Dr. Franklin again. Danisha, what you're describing is pretty typical. Listen, most days I'm fine. Yesterday or today, I was driving home, and I don't even know what thought crossed my mind, and I teared up immediately. I'm crying. The hospital that my mom died at is 5 minutes from my house. And when she just died, my daughter thought I wouldn't be okay driving past, but kind of was soldiering through. So I drove past it and I was fine. I want you to know that one day last week, I was driving past going about my business, and listen, the bawling that I put down in the car was just shocking, just out of nowhere. And so it happens, little things triggers a memory or a thought. Sometimes you're not even aware of what the thought was. I remember I was in the house and I was cleaning out something in the kitchen and I came across a reading glasses for my mom. And that broke me. I just bawled. And so it is natural that there are triggers that we experience that make us feel raw and just feels like it opened the wound all over again. And my understanding from other persons, because I've been doing a lot of talking about loss and grief, because that's my therapy, and I'm trying to make sure that we have more conversations around this. It's so critical. My understanding from a lot of persons who have experienced loss is that even years later, things will trigger you and you'll feel like crying or you'll cry. So that part of it I can talk about. But the first part of your question, or whichever part of it, Dr. Franklin, let me reiterate our question. Let me read our question again. How do you suggest dealing with the loss when it is the first thing that you think of in the morning and it lingers at nights? She has also followed up that and said, I get constant anxiety for the triggers. How do I deal with silent anxiety? So she wants to know how to cope with the loss when it's the first thing in the morning that's in her head and it lingers at night. And how does she deal with silent anxiety?
Well, dealing with silent anxiety is part of the process of dealing with anxiety. You'll have silent anxiety. You'll have, I guess, it's equivalent loud anxiety, where you're making a scream or a yell or what have you, or physical. It can come out in any ways. I mean, just on my story, like a song would trigger it, and I'm driving down the road and I'm hitting the steering wheel, and but I'm having kind of like an emotion of like, man, I miss them, but wow, is it like this now? So these things continually happen. This is part of the grieving process. And I think, and I'm starting to kind of get at the hint of theme that's going on, is that whatever you're going through after the loss is your grieving process. It doesn't look a certain way or anything like that. But the only thing about grieving is like quicksand. You can't stay in it all the time. So what I would suggest also too, to how to get out of the trigger, is to first realize that the trigger is going to dissipate over time. You'll see the frequency of thinking about it decrease. You'll see the duration of time decrease as well too. But you have to go through it, and I think one realization as you're going through it is to help you realize that this is what is making you stronger. It's like the gym. The gym hurts. As if the more strength you want, the more hurt you're gonna feel. But nobody goes to the gym with that in mind, the hurt. They only are concerned about the gains. That's what continues their route to go. So realize, number one, that this is how much you love that person. To think about them in the first thing in the morning and to continue to think about them is beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to do that. Now, here's the third step change that I want to help with this, is when you're thinking about them, what percentage are you thinking about them like, man, it was amazing to have them in my life? And a percentage of like, oh my God, they're out of my life, right? What percentage are you thinking along the day of when you think about them? Because there's two ways to think about this loved one. You could celebrate this loved one as you wake up in the morning. Like, man, like sometimes mornings I wake up and I'm like, man, I had a wonderful mama and daddy. Like they are, like I couldn't have picked any better parents. And I start talking about it in my mind. I'm going from this, that, and the other thing. Of course, the loss is there, but remember that you did have a life with this person, and this life can be savored forever. and forever. So what maybe you're doing now is you're more savoring the loss, and you'll transition as you continue to savoring the loss to savoring the gain or the absorption, which is what a pleasure it is to have this person, to have had this person in my life, and how much they've changed me.
And I wanna jump in right here and add something that I think is critical, because any viewer or participant that is on now, whose loss is like the end of a relationship, hearing this strategy might feel like, what? How do I make that work for me? But hear how it works for you, because my relationship just recently ended as well. So, that was another thing that just floored me and knocked the wind out of my sail while I was already grieving the loss of my mom. Now I had to be grieving this thing, and and it was just, but anyways, what we do in situations like that is we focus on, again, similar to losing a loved one, the good. Mm-hmm. What was amazing about this relationship or the person, and you give your energy, that thought, you redirect it to being grateful for what was good about it, right? And if you're gonna say there was nothing good about it, then you say, this is what you do now is be grateful for the lesson that it taught you, because you're supposed to be moving on from this relationship that has ended, that you're now acknowledging wasn't healthy for you, and there wasn't anything good that you can find. And if that's the case, it now means that experience has better prepared you to be a little bit more discerning, or you're more aware of the values and qualities that you need in your spouse and in your relationship. You now know. And so you will take that information and make better choices for your next relationship. And you will also heal from it. And coming through that experience, I guarantee you, when you're in the middle of it, it feels like the worst thing ever. But going through that experience, I guarantee you that on the other side of it, you're going to be even better than you were before. So you're stronger emotionally, psychologically, and so on. So you yourself would have grown through it if you're doing the steps where you're allowing yourself to feel the experience and heal from it and through it. So you're better off on the other side of it. And so also bringing that in, so we know that we can use these techniques not only when we're talking about the loss of a loved one, which is going to dominate most of the conversations that we're having, but it also is true for other kinds of losses as well. It's just to look at it in that other way. How do I apply this to my particular experience? Danisha, I hope that Dr. Franklin's response helped you. Do we have any other questions this afternoon? Crickets? No. Dr. Franklin, I'm going to give you the last word and then I'll close. Is there anything that you want to leave our viewers and our participants with this evening as we talk about, as we wrap up episode 1 of loss and grief?
Yes, and I think, one word comes out tremendously is called resilience. And I know it's a word that a lot of people are throwing around now, it's kind of like that buzz psychological word, but I love resilience, and resilience is the outcome of this process of grieving. And that's the end result. That's the thing you want to get to. That's the top step. And resilience means that you have a favorable outcome in spite of the loss, in spite of the adversity. It's not a one-way street when it comes to grieving and loss. It's not downhill from here. It's based on our perception and our perspective. And we are in control of that. When we know we're in control of how we can look at certain things, then we start to take the power back. We start to heal. We start to feel better. All these things that we want to happen. As you're going through the process, realize that the process leads to victory. And, I know when if you've ever gone into something in your life and it takes time to get through it, I'm sure the first day is not the same as the last day. And when you keep that in mind, knowing that the first day or the first week or the first year or what have you is going to experience, realize that there's more time that happens, and as time happens, just like the Earth going around the sun, we have seasons, right? But we're getting energy from the revolution around the sun. So we're never going to leave this person. We will never forget about this person. But what we're now are going to do is going to revolve around this person and gain our energy from this person. And as we go through our day to day, right, just like the Earth does, right, we'll experience the energy every day. And sometimes the energy will come out in a beautiful day, and sometimes it'll come out in a rainy day, a snowy day. But we just have to realize that we're getting better, we're getting stronger, we're going through it as we revolve around the sun.
Thank you so much, Dr. Franklin. Ladies and gentlemen, this discussion was a good one. It was instructive. I am excited, if one can be excited to talk about loss and grief, but I am, because the whole purpose of this is to help as many of us be able to better heal and cope with the experience of loss and grief. And so I am excited about that part of it, that at the end of this series, that many of us will be in a better place in dealing with the losses that life will inevitably has already sent us, and we'll inevitably experience. And so I look forward to exploring more and unearthing the stories and more of the strategies, because as Dr. Franklin said earlier, it looks different for everybody, and how it is for you, how it is unfolding for you, that's your process, right? And all we need to do is to find and implement techniques that are proven in ways that work for us to help us get to the other side where we can experience new joy. And so we're going to leave it here today for this episode of BTS Live, Loss and Grief. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. This afternoon has been lovely.